you have dedicated your life really to creating peaceful solutions and building peace, as well as writing, as well as providing all of us with visions of what the world could look like and what we could do. Um, so I'm not surprised that I think you're our only Nobel Prize nominee, but also the only one who's won three, four Peace Prizes, the Nirvana, the Luxembourg, the Goe Peace Prize, and you keep just going. Um, I also didn't know until I dug into for this evening that you helped set up the elders. Um, with Bishop Tutu and Richard Branson and Peter Gabriel and others. And of course I think I counted 8 books, everything from nuclear weapons, terrorism, to power and sex, to heart. And we're going to mainly focus on the 2 of the books tonight, just but Scylla's life and thinking. So the business plan for peace, because I know lots of you are interested in the business, but then also this one here, the mighty heart and action, which has also got a course related to it.
You've been doing your homework.
I have, apart from just chatting to you, but also, and I don't see our usual Scottish contingent on tonight, but I was going to say, and you were born in Scotland, is that right?
I was born in Shields, yes.
There we go. So, I don't know where Lucy is. There's John and Elaine. Hello. Um, but but I wanted to actually, before we go into everything, so welcome. Thank you for taking the time, a whole hour and a half. I think it will fly. But I really wanted to start with that upbringing, because you started this work very young. And it seems to me, when I've heard you speak, when I've read your books, that this was a vocation, but it was somewhat encouraged, or at least supported by your parents. I wanted just to check in on your family life. You have older brothers, and you're the youngest.
I'm the youngest, yes. My mum got fed up with having boys. She had 4 boys, and she said, that's enough. It was in the middle of the war. She said, I'm going back to Scotland, which was her homeland, to get a girl. And everybody said, oh, well, yes. And she did, which was great for me. But I just want to start by saying thank you for the beautiful way that you prepare this. And everything that I've done with Volans has been so beautifully organized. And I've enjoyed it talking to John, all sorts of people through you. So thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. It's such a privilege to get to do a
So
little bit of work with you.
back to growing up. Yeah, I grew up on a farm outside London, but it was when I was 13, I think, that the sort of first feeling of something needing to be done came, because I was watching a grainy old black and white TV in my parents' living room, and I saw Soviet tanks charging into Budapest. And they were mowing down young people not very much older than me. And so I rushed upstairs and started packing my suitcase. And my mum came up and said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm going to Budapest. I had no idea where Budapest was. And she said, what for? And I said, there's something so horrible happening there. I have to go now. And she said, don't be so silly. And I burst into tears. And she said, okay, I understand. This is really important to you, but you're far too young to be any help to anybody. And if you would just unpack your suitcase, I'll make it my business to see that you're trained. And she did. She sent me off to work in an old age home for survivors of concentration camps in Suffolk, actually. And I sat on the grass all summer, peeling potatoes and listening to their stories. And I was just completely moved and blown away. I didn't even really know what a concentration camp was before I went and listened to them. And the courage that they showed, and the capacity for forgiveness, in a way. It sounds extraordinary, but that's what they were saying. This must not happen again. And so I learned a lot from them.
And I can just imagine. And then you went to Algeria and then Congo. Quite, it's quite a lot. So just back to your parents, were they activists? Did they
No,
model
not,
any of this? Or
no,
did
my
they
father
just,
was a stockbroker and a farmer.
wow.
Um, he was a stockbroker during the day in London and then a farmer at night and on the weekends. And my mum ran the farm basically. But they were both incredibly hard workers. Um, and my father's motto was never mind the question. The answer is work harder,
Oh,
which,
wow.
which is a terrible thing to say to anybody, really. But it's driven me all my life. And so whenever there's a lull in activity, I start writing a book or something. But
Ah,
most of it's been much more like activity, which I really enjoy.
well, that's incredible. And so have you learnt to relax at all? And what do you do when you relax?
Particularly now. But gardening is my passion.
Ah.
And it's amazing when you go out and there's something growing in the earth and you touch it, as any gardener will know. I know by somebody's smiles that they are. It's a deep, deep reassurance that life is vibrant, that it's worthwhile, that it's clean. And, it doesn't matter how dirty you get gardening, but the whole thing is so brilliantly vibrant that it feeds me every time I go out. So that's my favorite thing. But you talked about Algiers. Yes, I decided I better go to Algiers, and it was just at the end of the revolution. And I got there, and I had no idea what I could do. But a friend had introduced me to a man who ran a home for orphan children, children who'd been orphaned by the war. And I said, can I help? And he said, well, yes, but I've got to make sure that you're going to be okay because it's down at the bottom end of Algiers. And so we got there and he walked me up the street, introducing me to all the merchants on the way up the street. And I thought, this is a bit odd.
Hmm.
Why did you do that? And when we got to the orphanage, and he said, so that you're safe when you walk back down again. A white woman in totally different environment.
Hmm.
But the kids were amazing. And I learned so much from these children. We sort of conversed in broken French. And it taught me a massive amount about survival, about what these children had been through, what they knew that I didn't know as from my upbringing. They already knew by the age of 6 or 7.
Wow. And
But
you were late teens, early 20s at this point?
18, I think,
Wow.
19. Mhm.
And so I'm gonna jump from your background just to because I find it fascinating. Um, or the do you think how do you think we might introduce some of that, I guess, knowledge and empathy with others in the young people's lives now? Because they're very engaged on, petitions and social media and so on. But really, a lot of them, especially in this country, I guess, my children to a certain extent live in a very, very nice bubble and they have to fight quite hard. And I guess you might have had to do the same to get out of that, to
To get
to
to
be of
grips.
service.
Yeah. And I think one of the things is that what you get to grips with, if you get to grips today, is so rough, so hard.
Mm,
What's happening in the world at the moment is very hard to come to terms with, or
mm,
even to begin to understand if you're a teenager. So what they need most of all, I think, is some basic skills, to themselves be able to resolve the conflicts they're faced with, because
mm.
otherwise just avoidance, or you know thinking about something else, or music or whatever. But everybody's involved in conflicts. Most teenagers are involved in conflicts.
Yes, with their parents, if nobody else. um,
And so how do you deal with that instead of just walking out in a huff, or
mm,
or bursting into tears, or whatever it is? And I think it was mainly Mandela who taught me this. He said, more conflicts are, I'm reading this because I just wanted to get his words right. More conflicts are resolved by the ability to listen than by any other means. He said, most of us think we're good listeners and most of us are not. And I really learned that. I learned it, I think most particularly in terms of trying to understand what really angry people are holding and what they want to say, but they can't because they're so furious, so resentful, and so on. So I've just been learning and teaching my colleagues how to listen, and teaching anybody that I'm involved in a dispute resolution situation with. Because what happens is, you know this, Louise, you know it very well, but what happens is that when we're just arguing and putting our point of view, we blurt out what we believe to be the truth or the case with our beautiful common sense, and then somebody else comes in with theirs. But what we don't do is actually listen to what the person has said. And that's when everything changes, because if you've been really putting across your point of view very strongly, and it's like this, and this is the truth, and I say to you, hang on a minute, can I just read back to you what I heard you say? Did you say X? Did you say Y? And then people start to nod. And then I say, was the real meaning of what you were saying this? Tell me if I've got it straight. And then they say, yes, yes, and then you're into a dialogue.
Yes, no, it's so important, and I want to come back to talk a lot about all the skills you think, but I think the listening is so important. As you said, that, so we use it a lot in the Imaginariums we hold for big corporates, just to remind people even that most of us listen only for patterns so that we can answer and seem clever because we've heard what you're going to say before you even finish. And of course, that's not the case. And actually, in our internal little team at Volans, we've started just practicing every week. We pick somebody else to deep listen with, just for 15 minutes altogether, where we just sit and really concentrate on hearing, which does help. And so I think it is kind of.
I bet it gets you further faster.
As far as I can see, it's the only way. There's so much noise that we put between ourselves and others. So that's really interesting. I want to do a little bit more of your background though, if that's okay, because I think it's fascinating, and I will come. I also, just to say, because I didn't do my normal intro, what we try and do with book club is to make it as much like a real in-person book club. So if you are able to have your video on, that's really nice, because it makes us feel we're not in a webinar. And secondly, when you have questions or comments, please put them into the chat. I'm going to pick them up. If Jenia, who's got Volan's name at her pretty picture, that she's going to pick them up and put them in a document behind the scenes, and I will then read them out and make sure that Scilla answers them. So please do. And we also find that this chat, there's so many clever, interesting people in this book club. So you might get answers from other people too. So please do put comments, questions in the chat. And if you can, put your camera on. I know not everybody can. A couple of people are probably heading home from work or somewhere else. But background. So you did all these things before you were 21. Concentration camp survivors, orphans, and so on. And you went to the Congo, so several, continents. And then how did you make the jump into nuclear? Because, a lot of your work has been in nuclear weapons discussions. How did that happen?
Well, in a way, it was South Africa, because I lived in South Africa for 10 years. And it was when South Africa was contemplating the idea of a nuclear weapon. And I began to think about it very hard, and then moved back to the UK via a time in France. And France, as you know, was already a nuclear nation then. But I suddenly, it was actually, I think it was in 1983, there was a story which wasn't well known at the time, but I picked it up fairly quickly, that a Russian scanner of the incoming video of all the military activity was told to come quickly to the screen, because it looks like there's an incoming volley of American missiles coming towards the Soviet Union. And this means that we've got to immediately tell our leaders to give the okay to release our weapons in response, because otherwise it will be a one-sided attack. So this was total crisis. And they called this man, who was an expert, to the screen. And this was now 15 minutes to go before the Russian missiles would have been launched. And he looked at the screen, he said, that's a flock of geese. And it was true. And I heard this story, and of course then they switched everything off. But I heard this story fairly soon afterwards, and I thought, if that's how close we are to total disaster, because that would have destroyed both a large part of the United States and certainly a large part of Russia. And I thought, this is too dangerous. And I had a young child, and I had been at Greenham Common and surrounded the base at Greenham Common with thousands of other women. So I was slowly waking up to the fact that this stuff is imminent. This is a huge, looming threat, and we have to do something about it. And as far as I could see, all the action that was going on was still this kind of action, argument, one-upping, boasting, threatening. And that was what was going on at the time. And I thought, there must be a better way than this. And so I thought, isn't it possible to, if we can find the right people who are actually involved in decision-making, to get them to sit down together and listen to one another? So long story short, via just a few people that I know, we received a visitor from China, and we got him into an Oxford college and talked to him about what he thought might work. And he said, well, look, if you can round up some people who really know what they're talking about, from your government, from your military, from your nuclear establishment, and persuade them to come to China, I will see to it that you get properly received. So I did. Ended up taking a general, a very senior person from the production of fissile materials, somebody who organized the targeting of our nuclear weapons, all by people being willing to say, I'll tell so-and-so. And the idea of going to China was interesting to them, because they didn't see how it could be done elsewhere otherwise. And this was, in quotes, informal. Right. It was not in the news. There was nothing attached to it. But I found myself with my delegation of 8 people on either side of a table, and on the other side was the second head of the entire Chinese army. That's 4 million men. And this man was the second head. So the thing had just gone up like that, but it was because it was all very quiet. And I can tell you stories about what happened during that meeting.
Yes, please. We can have one, maybe.
Just one. Well, he opens a meeting, and he was he was a very angry man, and I subsequently discovered why. But he was giving us an absolute lecture, and this went on for 20 minutes. And we only had an hour officially. And so I thought, we've got to stop him. And because all our delegation wanted to ask questions. So I cleared my throat and waited until he came to a moment's hesitation. And I said, thank you, General. That's most interesting, what you've told us. But we have some questions too. And he went red in the face, threw his hands in the air and shouted at me that he had so much more to say and I shouldn't interrupt him. Oh my goodness, totally blown it. And so he then started talking again. So I nudged the Admiral on my right and I said to him, David, you have a question, don't you? And he said, yes, I have lots of questions. I said, well, get your question ready. And then I heaved a deep breath, held my breath and said, Admiral, I said to the General on the other side of the table, General, this is fascinating what you're telling us. The Admiral on my right has a very important question for you, don't you, Admiral? And in he came with his question. And then we got into, finally, a bit of a dialogue. The main part of the story is this, that he invited us all to dinner. And it was hastily arranged, and we all sat down to dinner. And I was at his table. My Chinese is not good, and his English was non-existent. So we were doing it all through interpreters. But I asked him about his life. And it turned out that that man had been in wars for 45 years. And he was then 65. So he'd been in wars since he was 20. And I heard about some of his experiences. And I had tears in my eyes just listening to this man suffering. And then he got tears in his eyes because I was listening to him. And so the two of us,
Sitting there, tears in your eyes.
with our tears in our eyes. And then he said, well, that's enough talking. We must have some celebration now. He said, I believe it's somebody on your delegation has a birthday. And so I waved to the person whose birthday it was. And the General said, birthday cake. So we ended up having a party. And it was just fortunate. It was just good fortune that this man was, I could see that he was a terribly injured, suffering human being who'd done his absolute best for his country. And then, of course, he then opened the doors to some of the biggest institutes and the big think tanks that existed in Beijing at the time. And my delegation ended up amazed. And we went back and organized a quid pro quo and invited the Chinese to London and Oxford and so on. And that began the whole business of the nuclear negotiations, all absolutely off the record, below the radar, and therefore reliable.
Fantastic. And I guess it would be remiss of me not to ask you, how are you feeling about the nuclear weapon situation right now, with sort of Putin rattling his saber quite heavily, I guess?
Utter foolishness and utter risk-taking. And it's an indication of how ill Putin has become. And he's a man who's had the most horrific life, as probably you know, but he's deeply, deeply injured as a human being and very, very violent.
Yes.
And therefore extremely dangerous. And we'll see what Trump does with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess it kind of segues sort of nicely into something that is in several of your books, and it's this leadership. And you mentioned Mandela, and there's some lovely examples in the book of, why he is a leader, and how he carried that, I guess, not burden, but how he carried his leadership through. I was wondering, do you you also then talk about how there are many examples, and you've compiled examples of how women leaning into leadership in peace negotiations and wars can make a real difference. And I know you've been involved with the Ukrainian women. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Mm, mm. Well, there's not much I can say because it's all tremendously under the radar. But the basis is that Ukrainian women want to talk to Russian women, and Russian women want to talk to Ukrainian. And there are intermediaries, and it's going to be possible to put together some sort of a combined message. We don't yet know what it is. But the thing is that when women prepare to engage in negotiations, even though they haven't yet got a seat at the table in a particular instance, they prepare by, if they're well guided, by really trying to understand what the burdens are on the opposition. What if they were to be sitting around a table with if the Ukrainians were to be sitting around a table with their Russian counterparts, what would they need to know? What would they need to be thinking about?
Yeah.
What would be the undercurrents that would never be spoken about in official negotiations, because that would be all about quid pro quos and weapons and the amounts of weapons and the readiness to fire and all the rest of it. But what the women would be looking for is, how can Russia's pride be taken care of? Because it's vastly important to Putin. How can the standing of a comparatively, in quotes, comparatively weak country like Ukraine be brought forward in terms of its quality and the quality of its history and its society? Who could represent that in the negotiations? Who would be the right people to actually be able to get a system of listening going in the negotiations? So that's the approach, which is much more to do with the dynamics of the talks rather than the bargaining chips.
Yes, and you said,
which there are very few.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I noticed one of the things you wrote in one of the books was, you focus on the interests of people around the table rather than their positions or where they're bargaining from. So do you have, and I might use John's put a question in, and I'll sort of do you, and because you talked also to Putin and him being an injured human being, and my theory is that almost all violence or nastiness comes from fear and injury within people. So do you think, and this is John's question, is there a percentage of the population born peaceful and a percentage that is not?
I don't know. I think we're probably all born peaceful. In utero, we're probably all reasonably peaceful, but we may not. I mean, people may be very much injured before they're born. But I can't really answer the question, are we born peaceful? But I do know that our early years and our schooling and everything will guide us in that direction of really talking about skills now. I'm encouraged by what's going on in teenage education now, where teenagers are being taught some of the skills of communication, which includes obviously listening. That's encouraging. But unfortunately, most of our politicians didn't go through that training. Not all, and some very notable good listeners in our leadership. But most negotiations that I've witnessed or had anything to do with starts off with an absolute miasma of this is our position, and this is right, and you're wrong, and we can take you down a peg at the table, even if not on the battlefield.
Yeah.
I'm not properly answering your question,
That's all
really.
right. It's still fascinating. I can see Matt has put in a follow-up where he's saying, is it then that the percentage that know and receive love from birth and those that don't? So again, that bit of injury sort of that leads to the violence.
Yes and no. I mean, if you read Jung or anybody like
Mm.
that who's had his experience, it's very possible that people who've had very violent upbringings can learn to listen, can transform themselves. There have been incredible examples. And when they do that, they become vastly bigger human beings because they know what violence is all about.
Mm.
They've done it, they've felt it. And so they are incredibly useful, those who have transformed it. But there aren't many of them, as we know. But well, I'm trying to read the questions. I've got a
Oh,
John question here.
oh, don't worry. I've
Do.
got where we'll scatter them through as we chat. I think that works. And in terms of leadership, just I want to come back to this. Oh, well, actually, I was going to ask you something completely different, which was, have you come across, and you might have, this organization called Compassion in Politics, who are training Jennifer Nadel and others, who are training people, politicians, in how to be compassionate, which I think includes listening into that course.
It has to. I'm sure she does. No, I don't know her. I'd love to meet her.
I can
Introduce
introduce you, yes.
her, because we're going along similar tramlines, I imagine.
Yeah, because that is really needed. I guess
Ah,
at the top, we talk about teenagers learning those skills, but also those in positions of power now.
teenagers, I've seen teenagers transform an argument amongst very experienced grown-ups and stop them in their tracks because the teenager knew how to tease out the human behind the bluster.
Yeah, yeah,
Because most of what people do uh, intense negotiations is so revelatory of their own fear.
yeah.
You know, it's a mirror of their fear.
Of their own fear.
And that's where we need to get to. And that's why it's so helpful when people don't just that it isn't just a negotiation and then a big dinner, all of which is formal and all of which is overheard. And so, but it's enormously useful when a negotiation includes time off, when one negotiator can talk to somebody across the table and say, let's just have a chat over a glass of wine.
Mm.
And then things begin to change. They're not supposed to usually, but
Yeah.
they do, it changes a lot.
It mentions, and actually Jenny has got a follow-up question. It says, in negotiations, how important is it to listen to what people aren't saying as much as to what they are? And do you have any advice about how to sort of practically do that?
Yes, I'm sure
Go to the
Jen.
course, Mighty Heart course, Jenny.
Well, it's a question of changing the tone of the discussion. And one way to do that is, you know, if somebody's rabbiting on or speaking quite violently about what they believe to be the case, and you stop them and say, did you say this and have I understood? And they're so taken aback that they kind of gulp and say yes. And they start saying yes instead of no. And so one way is then to say to them, once you've listened to them, I'm very interested in some of the things you might not be saying yet. Is there something up your sleeve, or is there something you would like us to know off the record? That we could just, you know, turn off the recording for a moment and hear how you really feel. And very often people will respond to that. It's a question of being, instead of being in one's head all the time and seeing what's the best point I can make, how can I put that person off or put them down or whatever it is. But instead of being in your head, to be in your heart and say, what does this person need? You know, they're shaking, they're so tense. You know, how can I, you know, take them off for a coffee and talk about our children or something like that? And it sounds like being offbeat, but actually that connection is often what does it. I've seen it happen again and again and again.
I'd love to hear, like when you say somebody's shaking in a negotiate, is that that's how tense they have been? Will you talk us through a small example? Obviously, the Chinese example was fantastic. I'm keen to illustrate. If you can pull one out of the hat.
Well, I've even seen it when I've been asked to help British delegations who are going into a discussion, and just to hear them kind of talking about what they're going to say, I just noticed that they're kind of, if their hands were visible, they would be shaking. So wrought up and tense. And what helps in that instance is to say, hang on a second, tell me about the meaning behind what you're saying. What's the real message you want to convey?
Yeah.
Is it that we're right and they're wrong? Or is it, how can we connect here?
Yeah.
What is there in this discussion where we do actually have possibly a mutual approach or a point of view that we would share? It might be to do with something that's a kind of sideline of the actual hard stuff. It might be, are you having trouble getting your spares into the battlefield? You know, how, all
Yeah.
technical things that people wrestle with in a war.
And so presumably your technical knowledge of war is now, very high. No?
I haven't been in a war for quite a while, but no, I mean, I have the greatest respect for my military guides who explain things to me painstakingly. But my dad fought in the First World War. I had two brothers in the military, so I'm very respectful of what they learn to do, what their skills are, and their knowledge. And so, and they know that I'm not just a sort of flaky peacenik.
Yes. No, because I guess that's quite important, right? How you turn up. I want to go back to the books for a second. No, we've got the AI talking to us. We'll come back to AI. Because one of the things that strike me with these two books, so again, highly recommend both of them, but is that they're very practical. So this is when you say that everything is at a bit of a lull and you have some time, you sit down and you write a really practical book like the Business Plan for Peace, which not only tells us, well, this is how, but also, and what's the cost and where does that money come from in order to create global peace? And is that something in you, this idea, this practicality? There's very little thrill, and of course the Mighty Heart is a course and very deep, with exercises and so on. Is it? Yeah.
Well, it has to be practical because but the thing is, what's a practical way through that? I mean, if you're talking negotiations, the way through has to be as practical as the weaponry on either side or the tactics on either side. I'm not sure I'm answering your question though.
No. I was just fascinated by it. And actually, maybe a completely different question, talking about sideline on things, is do you read fiction when
Oh yeah,
relax? Yes.
I'm in yeah.
What are you reading at the moment?
Well, I'm a huge fan of the Hilary Mantel
Oh, yes.
everything that she writes. So I'm in the second part of the big one at the moment, which is massive. I mean, it's that thick, but
Yes.
she writes so well that I just love the way she makes immensely complicated things very, very simple and very human.
Yes. No,
And
no.
in a way, she's a tremendous example of what I've been talking about, because she got behind the politics of that whole period in Tudor England. She got underneath it like a mouse, you know,
Yes.
and understood what was going on in the background and presents it. And I absolutely love the intelligence of this.
Yes. No, no, I love those books. In fact, you're making me want to reread them. Um, Actually, and I guess her books are also to do with power. And you frame power beautifully as, human beings making decisions. So, and so if it's just people, we can communicate with them. But sometimes when you have somebody in with a lot of power, whether that's your boss, whether that's a politician or somebody state representing a state, how do you communicate with people in power who are looking, I'm going to say looking for trouble, but my colleague Cami had said we had this discussion and she said looking to enact violence. How do you practically approach them? You listen, you see if there's a connection on the side, but with a maybe it's not a Putin, but let's scale Putin down to being somebody in an organization. That could be a client, it could be a boss, somebody who you need to convince, or who you'd like to just communicate with before they do something that will harm others. It could be a fossil.
Yes. Well, it's not a new idea, but if possible, I'll get them out of the room and go for a walk. If possible in the park, or in a garden. And then just say, have you noticed, do you see that tree? It's amazing. And this is what this is what it sheds in the autumn. Start talking about something different. And then they'll start talking about what grows in the park in Moscow or whatever it is. And we get onto a different wavelength. Instead of being all there, all calculating, all adding up all the time, all logistics. We get into a human being. I'm walking up this path in this park with this person. And then they'll talk about their children, they'll talk about their backache. I might have noticed that they're sitting there going like this.
Yes.
And I say, is there anything we could do about your back? Would you like some heat on it or something like that? And I say, how did you know? And then we're in a different wavelength, because they'll know that it's possible to mix the personal and the political without it being dangerous.
Yeah.
Because negotiators always say, don't be personal,
because it could be dangerous, and they could and I guess, so for me, what I hear when you say that is I hear connection, connection, connection. And human connection is in a sense what's going to save us all, or allow communication to happen in those.
Well, it's what Volans is all about, in my experience. It's all about communication. Everything that John's done, that I've been witness to, it's been superbly organized to get people engaged with each other, not at loggerheads.
Yes. No.
And clever.
Absolutely. And as you say, with a lot of work. I can see Laurie has asked a question, and I can about examples from Business Plan for Peace. Maybe I can give you one example that I pulled out, Laurie, and then we can see if Scilla has others. So there's one in the cost comparison section. Again, it's a very practical book. So it's sort of, there's a comparison around military expenditure in 2016 being 1,686 billion US dollars. Whereas the Global Peace Plan in the book comes to 1.9 billion, or just under $1 billion over for 10 years. So a fraction really of that. And then it sort of goes down into other comparisons on decommissioning cost of Fukushima at 105 billion. The amount of spent on ice cream in the world, 59 billion per year. Those so it's just very interesting as you go through it. It's just one thing that struck me. It was the ice cream that obviously drew my eye, Laurie, but maybe there are other examples you want to highlight, Scilla. I don't know.
Well, yes. I mean, I'll bring it more to the present day, because some of the figures in the book are obviously when I wrote it, but which was 3 years ago or maybe 4. But what's really, really impassioning me at the moment is how the arms corporations on both sides, but I'm talking particularly about the United States, is actually driving war. I'll tell you why. When a very big, there are 6 major arms corporations vying with each other, but they will produce a particularly brilliant new gadget, new weapon. And then they make sure that if they're selling it to Ukraine, or then they'll make sure that Russia knows about that. And then Russia will want it, or Russia will make sure that it's developed there. And what this does is it drives the technical levels of the conflict up and up and up, which is super fun for the military, but it's terrifying for everybody else, because there isn't protection against it. More people are being harmed, being blown up in their homes and so on. But it is the profits of the big arms corporations are what drives war now. I've just done a study on this, and it's actually it's like a wheel behind war, and this is why this war is going on for so long.
And
and
actually,
yeah.
go on, sorry, go for it. I want
No,
to hear. I was just going to say it leans into again, John had put a question in earlier, which was about ESG funds that in theory are good. You know, they've started embracing defense-related stocks as under, you know, environment. Yeah.
Defense, I mean, they're to me they're deeply culpable.
Yes.
Because of how I see now that and the stock market is obviously, you know, enjoys it, but the stocks of big arms corporations are actually driving the war.
Yeah. So we should all, this is a call to action, look at our pensions and speak to our pension funds or any other investment funds we have, and check not only that there aren't any fossil fuels mixing around in there, but also defense. Just
divest.
Yes, divest.
Yeah. But I'd love to balance this with telling you a story about how the military have actually managed to totally avoid war. This is the story of a young US lieutenant colonel in the Iraq War, and he's leading his men. This is some years ago. He's leading his men down a street in Najaf, young recruits, heavily armed, and out of the favelas, the streets on each side of the road and the mosques, came furiously angry men, local men, screaming in Arabic. And these young American soldiers hadn't a clue what they were saying, what they were screaming, and they had no idea what to do. And Chris Hughes, that was his name, walked straight into the middle of the whole fray and gave his men an order they'd never heard in their lives before: kneel. And they, in their heavy body armor and their helmets, they wobbled to the ground and did as he did which was to put the barrel of their weapons into the sand, bow their heads like that. So 19 men in the platoon, in the party, and they're kneeling in their heavy weaponry, body armor, the whole thing, in front of these furiously angry men, and the whole thing grew silent. Astonishment, respect. It gives me shivers just to talk about it. And after about 3 minutes, everybody went home. Nobody was killed. So, but behind that is a really important piece of knowledge that he either knew consciously or unconsciously. And that is that when people are as furiously angry as these men were, they must have been humiliated. And humiliation is one of the biggest drivers of conflict in the home, in schools, everywhere. And the antidote to humiliation is respect. And that's what he did, like that. Just like that. Brilliant. I hope he got a medal for it.
Yes, no, me too. It's very powerful, this idea of respecting somebody who we either might disagree vehemently with or be very scared of. And how do you conjure that respect and display it?
Louise, you're absolutely right. Because when we're confronted with somebody who's got more ammunition than we have, knows more than we do, is more important than we are, we tend to feel a bit vulnerable. But that's the very moment to find a gesture of respect.
Okay. No, I think we could all take that. Maybe this is a good time to switch in a little bit to skills, because obviously, especially the Mighty Heart is about the skills that we need now, both for negotiation and based on all your years of experience and tools you've come across, but also, not for non-negotiators, if there are any of us non-obvious negotiators. Would you just chat us through, the thinking behind that? I know you wrote it during COVID. What are the top line skills that you sort of go through in the book and then in the course, and we can come back to that.
Thank you. Well, funnily enough, and I was just sitting there. It was the last week of 2019. I had no idea what was coming, and I was sitting and sort of scratching my head and wondering what to think about or write about. And suddenly this sort of, I'm not sort of in favor of downloads, but this download came and I started writing, and I wrote for 2 weeks, and that became this course of 10 modules. And the first bit of it that struck me, and I have no idea why, was what breaks your heart. Because when I went back to what had broken my heart, aged 11, when my brother was killed, was when I was able to look at that devastation, underneath it was a huge amount of power. But it took quite a long time before I was over the pain.
Of course, 11.
Behind the pain was power. And the power is what's driven me all the way through, I think, doing the kind of work that I do. So it's been a gift. So I ask people, what breaks your heart? Because if we can identify, was it the death of a dog when we were a child? Was it whatever it was? And go into our hearts and see what that heartbreak was, and then look at what it has enabled us to do and still can enable us to do. That's where the power is. So then the next bit is deep listening, because it's my absolute go-to for any conflict, is to be able to interrupt a huge argument or yelling match and say, hang on a minute, just let me be clear that I understand what you're saying. And that, as I've said, I won't repeat, that changes everything. And then it's compassion. The next step is compassion, because if we can listen compassionately to a person that we're angry with and just sense their anger and their heartbreak and their shock, and lean towards them and speak, whether it's a technical issue we're speaking about, or but speak compassionately as to an injured person, because all of us have injuries, and most of us who get into big fights are injured. So we have to look for that. And then the next thing, the next skill in the course is taming your inner critic, because all of us, I think, I'm looking around, but
Yes.
all of us have a voice that wakes us up in the middle of the night and says, what up? You just blew it. I mean, honestly, how could you make such a fool of yourself? Why on earth did you say such and such? And my inner critic beats me like this, beats me up, basically. And
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to hear, because I know you, how you deal with that, and I think that's a wonderful. I've been channeling you recently at 3 a.m. when I wake up with all those thoughts. So, and then you tell everyone what you do, because it's been very
well,
helpful.
I get up, and I usually go in the bathroom so I don't wake my husband. And I sit there, and I sit on one cushion, and I put my inner critic, its voice, on another cushion. It's completely balmy, but don't worry. And I say to it, why did you wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning like that? And then I go and sit on its cushion, and I say, because you made such a fool of yourself today. I mean, why did, honestly? And then I said, go back to my cushion. And I say, tell me more. I mean, what are you really feeling? And I go back onto his cushion and said, well, I'm ashamed of you. I mean, really, I thought you could do better than that. And I said, this is getting a bit boring now. You're constantly beating me up for something I haven't meant to do. Can't you be a bit helpful? What have you got to say that's actually helpful? And then I go back to his cushion, and then it's a he. Yours might be male or female. He starts to be helpful, and boy, does he have good ideas. But you have to face up to him first, and stop him with this like that. Anyway, that's the critic. I love the critic. Then we have to clean up our anger, because anger is very, very useful as an energy. But when you splay it out at somebody, when you shout at somebody, you do damage. And sometimes you do damage that lasts a lifetime when we get angry with people. So the big trick is to take the anger inside as a fuel, get you up in the morning, but not get angry with somebody else. So use the anger to propel you to write that book, or to send that message, or to get something done. Even doing the housework is great, but that you get busy using the anger as fuel instead of as destruction. And then there's the one I really love, which is developing presence. When we see somebody stand up at a meeting who has presence, they've got time. They've got, even if they're standing up in a big, huge hall, if they've got presence, they speak slowly. They wait for the right word to come, even if it takes a moment, but we get them because they've got this presence. They have, it as soon as you see it. And that's what Lieutenant Colonel Chris Hughes, who I just described, what he had. He had presence. He could walk into the middle of that murderous throng.
Incredible.
And tell his men to kneel. So that's presence in action. And then my other favorite one, one of the modes of the Mighty Heart training is right brain intelligence. In other words, heart intelligence. And it's my favorite subject at the moment, because I just want to tell you what I've discovered about how you contrast the intelligence of AI with the intelligence of the heart. Because most
did you we had that AI bot on here taking notes for somebody earlier.
yeah,
So
it's very useful. Saves me lots of work, but there are a lot of things that he is completely unable to be intelligent about, but the heart is. And if you think about them, can the human capacity for intuition, for example, for integrity, for compassion, can that be replaced by a machine? So I just wanted to talk you through one or two of the capacities of the heart that we can use any day that AI cannot access. So the first one I would suggest is courage, taking a stand that may be unpopular. You need the courage of your heart. There's the same, cœur is the word for the heart in French. So courage is in the heart. So you have to have a lot of courage to stand up. Once I had to stand up in a meeting of 200 military people and people from the Ministry of Defence and question some of the accounting on what had been spent for the decommissioning of nuclear weapons that was supposed to have been spent. And I knew the figures were wrong, and I knew what the right figures were. And I got shouted at, "Sit down, madam." And I was shivering, because I was really I think I was one of 6 women in a room of 200. And it took everything I had to open my mouth again. Anyway, that's courage. Altruism, to act from a generous spirit. You know, what the heart knows that is right, which is sort of beyond the argument, if you like. Beyond the essence of what's going on is the altruism of the heart. And then self-awareness. Now that comes back to what I was saying before about spotting what we're up to, because many people that we see on TV or in meetings don't have any awareness of what they're actually on about, what they're revealing about themselves, what they're doing to protect themselves or to exalt themselves or to show off. I do a lot of showing off, so I know it. And
and I'm just going on that. I'm just going to, a piece of evidence here is this amazing picture of Scilla with a very, very long sword that we all in the office taken by. Sorry, I'm teasing you.
It's just behind me on my
Is
mind.
it really? Wow.
Yeah.
Where did you get it? I have to ask.
I was in my local village, and I went into a jewelry shop looking for a present for somebody, and on the wall hanging up there I saw this sword. It's that long, and I just looked at it and I thought, I've got to have that. So I said to the owner of the shop, is that sword for sale? And he said, no, certainly not. And I said, but it's really, really important to me. Have you got another one like it? And he said, no. And I said, could we negotiate? And he said,
Oh dear, he didn't know what he was walking into negotiating with you.
Anyway, eventually he sold it to me for £100 for a sword. And I've absolutely loved it. And every child who walks into my sitting room said, can I touch it? And then we do the sword meditation with them, because there's a wonderful meditation with a sword. Anyway, we're digressing.
We're digressing from AI. We're going to go back to AI.
Yeah. Well, the other skills of the heart, obviously, empathy, deep listening, all these things which come from the heart. Wisdom doesn't come from here, comes from here. Integrity, forgiveness, intuition, all these things, they're all heart skills.
Well, and I have a, and somebody's going to tell me that I'm wrong, but I had a funny experience with AI in the summer where I was due to do an interview and I turned up and they said, "Hope you don't mind, but what we've done is we've fed everything we know about you into ChatGPT or another AI bot, and that's generated the questions for our interview. And do you want to just review them?" And I thought, fine. And what was fascinating was the questions in themselves were quite interesting and intelligent and so on, but they were all, of course, backwards looking because they don't know anything about what I think of the future or what I'm doing right now that's not in the public domain. And so I said to them, this is all good, but you're not going to get anything really interesting that isn't known already. So that future, um, unless it's unless we assume a stable future and that what you've done in the past is going to be very similar to what you're going to do in the future, I don't see it. Anyway, somebody in the chat tell me off that I'm wrong, but it was just fascinating.
That's a great example. I think that I really like that you said that.
Um,
Hmm.
there's a little bit of chat in the saying it might be an assumption that AI can't be programmed with a heart, but not a human heart, obviously. Caroline, do you want to expand on that? Do you dare in this negotiation? If so, you feel free to unmute for a second.
Hello. Hi, Scilla.
Hi.
Hello.
Yes,
Hello, Caroline.
lovely. Hi, Scilla.
Oh, how lovely to see you.
Likewise, love. Yeah, I mean, AI is still in its infancy,
Mm.
uh, and it is still dependent on who is programming it.
Mhm.
So let's say Scilla is programming the AI or feeding it, it will be fed with Scylla's wisdom, experience, and heart as well.
Mm.
Might see sort of an AI that sort of takes it to the second level, if you want, like speeding it up. So I think in anything, and I think Scilla, you touched upon that before with your great wisdom, that if you step into something with fear, that sets a condition of the negotiations or the conversation you have. Whereas if you step in it with an open heart or with courage, or sort of with the questions, like that change the dynamics.
Mhm.
And I do think that if people like Scilla and other wisdom keepers will have this open dialogue with the keepers of the AI still, I think it can change the dynamic, So it's still so early, so you can really sort of like it's basically like operating with a child, or raising a child. I had the great privilege of working with a child who literally had nothing, and I really had to teach my child, because was diagnosed with autism. Had to teach my child everything from language to emotions
Mhm.
to skills to everything, and and with my intent, because my intention was actually quite selfish. Actually, it's like I wanted my child to be free and self-sufficient, so with that intention, it's now sort of a person who is like has incredible lots of friends, so sorry, I
No, no, it's wonderful. But you're right.
wanted to
If there is potential in AI, and if the right people
yes, yes,
program it,
Yeah.
yes.
there might be
Especially
something
now when
there.
it's still a child, like AI is still in its infancy, and
Got
now
it.
is really the time
Brilliant.
to. I saw a really interesting interview with, and still I
Um,
really engaged with the CEO, the ex-CEO of Google, just stepped down
Yeah.
yeah.
about the AI. That would be a brilliant person to talk to with
Sure.
you. So, yeah.
Okay.
For
Set it
future.
up.
Let's look at that. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you very much, Louise. Sorry.
No, no, no. So
Hmm.
so I think it's a really interesting point. Obviously, we don't know where AI goes. One of the things that you and I spoke a little bit about was that this idea that you can open your heart and you can work to enlarge it. by practicing. Do you want to expand a little bit on that?
Yes. I mean, this is quite new. This is long after I wrote the book, but I keep experimenting. And I've had some really, really difficult family issues to deal with recently. And I noticed that I was kind of a bit closed up with a little bit of prejudice about certain people and so on. And so I just took it all down into my heart in a quiet moment, and I held my heart like that. I don't you can see it like that.
Yeah.
I held my heart and I just looked into what size my heart was. I mean, I know literally it's about that size, I think, something like that. But it was quite tight. And I just asked it if it could expand. Could you grow bigger, please, my heart, to accommodate some of these difficult people? Could you accommodate them? And I was stunned what happened. It was almost as though these individuals kind of climbed in and inhabited my heart so I could see them differently. And I could see myself differently too. I have a ferocious inner critic, and my heart is now sort of not taking on my inner critic. That would be a fight, but my heart is now taking care of my inner critic, I think is the thing to say. And the heart, I'm discovering that my heart has this incredible capacity for adaptation, for growth, for expansion, for contraction as well. If I'm mean, my heart contracts. If I'm open, it begins to do that.
That's
So,
really interesting.
yeah, so it's a learning process. And
Absolutely.
it's powerful. That's the big thing that I've learned. Sorry to interrupt you, that heart is so damn powerful. When I open my heart, things change that my brain could never have organized, ever. So I think given the world that we're about to inhabit, and that is, so challenging and so difficult, that the capacity of the heart is going to be our main ally. That may sound a bit woo-woo, but it's absolutely not.
I don't think so. And I think what we're seeing is more and more, I guess people are waking up to it in our world, at least, that, it's no longer considered too woo-woo to say, obviously we work with head, heart, and hands. Even schools, there's a brilliant educational group called Big Education, and that's their principle, and that's how they're teaching teachers and children, which is fantastic. So I think this is coming. How do you see it, I guess, linked to ancient wisdom, indigenous wisdom? Do you see that need, or is it just innately human, and certain indigenous groups have kept that humanity stronger to their hearts than we have?
Well, they're closer to it, and
Yes.
because mostly they're closer to nature than we are. And nature is the biggest teacher for us who are, living in the West, so to speak. Just even any contact with nature that you can have, even if you take a branch of some plant with you to work, anything that keeps you in contact with nature is going to make you healthier and your decisions better, and so on. So what indigenous people have is that constant contact with nature and with the spirits, whatever they see them to be, and with forces, whatever they may be, that may want to find some way of guiding us stupid human beings into not doing so many stupid things, as we do. I just want to say, Louise, you are the most brilliant interviewer I've ever known.
No.
You're just so good at it, and you spread things out and make them possible to talk about, and I'm really
Oh,
grateful.
no, it's very easy to talk to you. And I've just realized, you know, when we said, oh, it's an hour and a half, and we've now done an hour and 22 minutes. So I guess there's a couple of things I wanted to touch on. So one was a call to action, because we you know, you talk about I guess how sort of the theme of citizen advocacy and what can we all do. So maybe we should just go there.
Yeah.
Probably
Okay.
not for so long. All the people on this call that I know are change makers and will take a lot of action, but I'd love to hear sort
Yes.
of
Well,
what you think.
really, it's so important to me this, that it's the last two modules of the Mighty Heart. And module number 9 is taking a stand on an issue you really care about. So often we find ourselves, could be in a session with your child's teachers. It could be when you're up against a lot of very knowledgeable civil servants who are brighter than you are, or whatever it is, when you're in a difficult situation, how do we stand up? I think it is important to stand up when there's something that you believe in that you have to say, even if it's in church, doesn't matter. Stand up and then breathe like mad, breathe deeply, even before you stand up. And then say how the words come, not your proposed speech, but how the words come from your heart. And that's the most powerful communication of somebody taking a stand on an issue that they care about, because it won't be wishy-washy. It'll be very, very clear. The words that come from our heart are clear communicators. So that's the one. And the last is being in service. I think the big challenge for all of us now is to put ourselves in service to the planet, to the country, to the people, because most of us, certainly who've got the wherewithal to spend an hour and a half talking and listening like we're doing, have the wherewithal to be in service. So to look around ourselves and say, where can I use what I've got, what I've developed, what I've coached myself into, where can I put that in service? And it might be to the local WI, it might be to your child's school, it might be to your MP, it might be to your government. But to put yourself and your knowledge and your passion in service to the future of our children. And it's beyond making money now. It's beyond being famous. It's beyond being successful. It's way beyond any of that. That's all old hat. What the mantra of the future is service. It has to be.
You're making me well up, Scilla. This is not okay. Nobody does this. It's not okay. So as one of the most powerful call to actions we've had, so stand up for what you believe in, take time to breathe, speak from the heart, and put yourself in service. Really beautiful. And as if that isn't enough, as we sort of round off the next few minutes, and Scilla has very, very kindly offered, we've talked about this mighty course, heart course, which is online, 10 modules, starting with what breaks your heart to ending with being in service and how you're in service. And Scilla and I spoke, and I said, I'm really keen for all of us, our Volans team, to take part in this course. And so Scilla very, very generously offered that we could organize, because normally these courses are run for corporates or big organizations, that we can, I'm going to say a Volans community course, if anybody is interested, to take part in it. I think it's quite extraordinary opportunity. As I said, I know you've run them for H&M and Deutsche Börse and others, but
yeah, I would love to, because just my experience of Volans is that you people gravitate to Volans who are doers, who are actors, you know, people who take action. And I would love to. We have some remarkable people that offer the different modules of the course. It's much better to do it live. I mean, we can do it online, but we do it introducing our various best speakers and put us across of the modules. And I've got, you know, a fantastic facilitator who can take us through it. And I would love to introduce it if you want me to. And I think it's powerful stuff that people want very much at the moment.
So it was just so this is an invitation, because you've been on this chat, on this book club session. You're the first to get an invitation. If you are interested, maybe drop me a note at louise@volans.com. We'll also put the link to my email in the follow-up from this, with the video recording that you'll get in a couple of days' time. And so yeah, so let us know. I think it's an incredibly wonderful offer, and I know, Scilla, you don't often do the introduction yourself because you have this wonderful team of facilitators. You know, Matt's saying that he 100% recommends your crew, so that's lovely.
Oh, thank you, Matt.
So with that, with the call to action and what can you put yourself in service to, and the offer of a Mighty Heart course, knowing that you'd have to think about how your heart breaks. Brilliant, Sue. I'm very glad. Then please do, yeah, get in touch. Thank you for sharing this hour and a half with us.
Thank you.
And
thank you, Louise, because as I said, it really is a pleasure talking to you, because it's unpredictable, and you take me to places I might not otherwise have gone. So I'm very grateful.
Well, thank you. We could talk for hours, and there's so much. I have more notes and questions that I had planned, but this is where we got to. Thank you, everybody, for joining, especially. And I see we've got the next generation on Hugo's lap as well. So that's wonderful. Thank you, Hugo.
Lovely to see all your faces now. I didn't see you all before.
Now we can see everyone.
Oh.
Thank you very, very much. And Scilla, we will speak soon. And please do send us a note if you're interested in the course. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise, so much.
Bye. Thank you so much.